So we saw earlier the ionic bond, and we said for the ionic bond it's about one atom gives electrons to another one, to another atom, from one atom to another atom. And when they split, each atom would keep its electron. So one atom would be positively charged and the other one would be negatively charged because the electron was moved from here to here. Now, let's see the the covalent bond. Covalent bond. Here it is about sharing electrons. So they share electrons. Two atoms, each one will contribute an electron, and these electrons now they belong to both atoms. If they decided to split, each atom would keep its electron. Or not keeps its electrons, meaning it means that they would restore or retrieve their electrons. Here with the ionic bond, this atom, the one that gained that electron, would keep it and it will turn into ion. But here, if they decided to split, each one would restore its electron and everyone is happy. So let's see the details or some details about this covalent bond. A classical example is the hydrogen ion. Hydrogen as an atom, it has one proton and one electron. Now for hydrogen, in order to be happy, it has to have two electrons. So for this hydrogen, currently it is unhappy. Let's assume there is another hydrogen, also has one proton and one electron. And this other hydrogen also is not happy. So they will kind of talk to each other and say, okay, why don't we share these electrons? And that's what will happen. This hydrogen would bring its electron forward. The other hydrogen would bring its electron forward. And now both electrons would spin around both atoms. So for this atom, now it has two electrons spinning around it. And similarly for this atom, it has two electrons spinning around it. So both are happy atoms. And that is exactly what's happening with the hydrogen. Now it says here it's a single covalent bond because each one of these atoms contributed with one electron. So this is single, just one electron. So it is a single covalent bond. However, with oxygen, it is a double covalent bond. And I think you can guess it. Yep. Each atom contributed, let's say this is the blue one, contributed two electrons. What happens with the oxygen, it's in its outermost shell, it has 6 electrons. So in order to get 8, it's lacking 2 electrons. Similarly, the other oxygen has 6. So they will talk to each other and they will say, okay, let's share, each one of us would share 2 electrons. So they will come closer to each other and each atom will share 2 electrons, and these 2 electrons are going, as we saw with the hydrogen, to spend equal time around each atom. and therefore both atoms would be heavy, and that is double covalent bond. However, like these examples, sorry, these examples between identical atoms, but it's not always like this. Sometimes we get different atoms get involved in a covalent bond. And a classical example for that is the oxygen. Oxygen, as we saw earlier, it has 6 electrons in its outermost shell. So it needs 2 more. So it will talk to the hydrogen. This is hydrogen 1, it has 1 electron. And this is hydrogen 2, it has 1 electron. And it will tell them, you know what, let's share these 2 electrons. Let's share these 2 electrons. Now, these 2 electrons are going to spend equal time, or they are going to spin around both atoms. Similarly, these pair of electrons are going to spend equal time around both atoms. Well, technically not equal time, we will see that, but they are going to spin around both atoms. And that is also covalent bond, and this is the water molecule. This is the water molecule. However, with the water molecule, it's more than just sharing, and that would lead us to see the subtypes of the covalent bond. Here we have 2 subtypes. The first one is called nonpolar covalent bond, and the second one is called polar covalent bonds. Now, what is the difference between both? As we saw, for example, with the oxygen or with the hydrogen, we have 2 identical atoms. Let's say these are the oxygen, actually. These are the oxygens, oxygen, oxygen. Each one is sharing equal number of electrons. So both are identical in size, although my bad drawing, but they are identical in size. And these electrons, I'll draw them in a different color. These electrons are spending equal time around both atoms. So both atoms are feeling or sensing that they have 8 electrons in their outermost shell, right? That is what we understood from the covalent bond, and that is nonpolar covalent bond. Let's see now the polar covalent bond. So in the nonpolar, the electrons are shared equally. Equally, it means they are spending equal time around each atom. Equal time around each atom. But with the polar covalent bond, the electrons are not shared equally. And the classical example of that is the water. What happens with water, so this is the hydrogen, this is the electron of the hydrogen, this is the electron of the oxygen, this is the electron of this hydrogen, and this is the electron of oxygen. Technically or theoretically, these electrons should spend equal time around both atoms, right? And these electrons should spend equal time around electrons, around both, about both atoms. But in reality, that's not what's happening. These electrons, in reality, they are spending more time around the oxygen and less time around the hydrogen. More time around the oxygen, less time around the hydrogen. And the same thing here. More time around the oxygen, less time around the hydrogen. More time around the oxygen, less time around the hydrogen. Why is that? Because oxygen is so big. It is a big atom comparing to the hydrogen. It has 8 protons. Protons, if you remember, these are positively charged atoms. Okay, so 8 protons. If you compare, if you think of this as magnetic power, and the hydrogen has just 1 proton, then the magnetic power of 80 protons is, of course, much more than the 1 proton. So these electrons are going to get attracted to the oxygen. And that's why they are going to spend more time around the oxygen, less time around the hydrogen. What does this lead to? It leads that the oxygen will sense there are extra electrons around it. Therefore, the oxygen would start to display negative charge. It's not truly a negative charge, it's like a slightly or partially or a feeling, if you want to put it in this way. Whereas for the hydrogens, they will sense that they lost their electrons, so they will start to display a positive charge. Again, that's not real because the electrons are still coming around them every now and then, but since most of the time the electrons are away, so then they will develop this kind of sensation. That would lead to a polar molecule. Polar, if you remember, or if you, of course you know it, the batteries, right? It has 2 poles, one positive, one negative. Here, the water molecule, in general, has 2 poles, one positive pole, one negative pole. And that is the polar molecule. So polar molecules, usually, or most of the time, or at least in our course, they are a result of covalent bond where electrons are shared unequally. Covalent bonds where electrons are shared unequally. Unequal sharing of these electrons, and that is the polar molecule. Okay? Now, with the polar molecules, they can develop, especially if there is a hydrogen, they will develop a hydrogen bond. And to understand the hydrogen bond, we need to go back to here. I will clear all of this. And of course, now before going into this, before the hydrogen bond, now remember, we said here there are 2 negative charges, here there is 1, there is 1, so also 2 positive. So the overall netted charge of the water molecule is 0, is neutral, right? Even if this is feeling, even if the oxygen is feeling that I have 2 negative charges, even the hydrogens are feeling we are a little bit positive, but the overall netted charge of the water molecule of the H2O is 0, it's neutral. Now let's understand the hydrogen bond. Of course, this water molecule is not isolated. It's surrounded by other water molecules. Like these are the oxygens, okay? Each oxygen has a hydrogen, 2 hydrogens bound to it. And all of these hydrogens, they are feeling slightly positive. Whereas all of these oxygens, they are feeling slightly positive. Slightly negative. So here we have a negative and positive, they will start to attract. Okay? Here, positive and negative, they will start to attract. They will start to attract. They will start to attract. And this might attract to another one. This might attract to another one. This will get attracted to here. This will get attracted to here. Okay? And so on. So these are the hydrogen bonds. So these are the hydrogen bonds. And these are attraction forces. And actually they are weak attraction forces. Weak attraction forces between polar molecules. And since we are talking about hydrogen bond, between polar molecules with hydrogens in them. Okay, so this is the hydrogen bond. It's a weak attraction between oppositely charged regions of polar molecules. So, and that is like a very unique feature of water. It gives it a lot of its properties, and as you can see in these examples, all of these dots are hydrogen bonds. And these, as we said, weak. And what do we mean by weak? They are easily broken, and they are also easily reformed. So they are constantly, even if in a settled cup of water, they are constantly broken and constantly reformed subtenuously without any engagement of any external factor. It's just because the positive and negative charges of these atoms. So this table will summary all the three types of chemical bonds we are going to study, their strength, their description, and some examples about them. I will stop. This is the video also that will explain them, so please watch it. I will stop here, or no, let's finish these two slides, and then I will stop here. Now for our body, living organisms contain only certain elements. We have six major elements that they are forming 99% of our body, but these are not all. Okay, yes, these are the most abundant, but we have other 12 elements, and all of these 12 are important. They have functions related in life. So just take a look about them and get a general idea about their functions. Okay, we might, and of course you need to know their symbols, or at least the basic ones, the first ones. Okay, we might talk about this more in the lab. But anyway, this is an overview of these atoms and their functions in life. So I will stop here. Please post your comments and questions into the forum about the covalent bond. What did you understand? What you didn't understand? Either in writing or with the videos. And we will talk soon about this.